Greetings from Alpha Tau Omega headquarters in Indianapolis. Today I am talking with Kyle Stepp. Kyle is an alumnus of the New Mexico ATO Kappa chapter and the 2016 Thomas Arkle Clark Honoree for Alpha Tau Omega. He worked as an expansion consultant in 2016 and 2017 for the National Fraternity and was quite successful. Kyle, as you will soon hear, has an exceptional story. He's a paratriathlete currently ranked 15th in the world, but parasports are a recent addition to his life. He was raised in foster care and boys' homes and beat a stage 4 cancer diagnosis at the age of 14. After that diagnosis, Kyle lived the next 12 years with a metal rod in his leg, but a biking accident in 2020 forced him to have an amputation of that leg above the knee. Kyle, however, is, in his words, turning that pain into purpose. Alongside being a top-level athlete, Kyle works as an independent legislative consultant to champion equitable health care and is a dedicated advocate for LGBTQ and disability rights. I'm Wynn Smiley, and this is the ATO Show. First of all, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Wynn?
Good. You do have an exceptional story, Kyle. An amazing story, actually. How old are you right now?
I'm 29, turning the
29 years young. You have packed more in your life, or you've had more things in your life than most people do in probably 3 lifetimes. Just to give some perspective for folks who are listening, prior to your cancer diagnosis, which they gave you very small percentage of survival, correct?
Yeah.
And so you beat that. That wasn't like, oh yeah, you'll go through some chemotherapy and we'll do some surgery and you should be okay. It was just the opposite. It's like, well, Kyle, chances of you surviving this are not very good. But before that, give us a bullet point version of the adversity that you faced prior to 14.
Yeah, when I grew up in a normal family my first 4 years, like most kids. I had a loving mom, a loving dad, but unfortunately my mom and dad fell addiction to alcohol, and because of that, just the family fell apart. And at a young age, I was in a really bad car accident because my dad was intoxicated, and we were airlifted to in the ICU. To my parents navigating their addiction with alcohol, and became an extremely abusive home. It's ultimately where I was living in boys' homes, I was living in foster care, I was living in safe houses due to the domestic violence that, my mom and my stepdad were experiencing. Because of that, I was always raised by the community. Like, I didn't want to be back home where they were fighting and beating each other up, and like the late nights of, being intoxicated and drunk. I would spend as much time as I possibly could after school, whether it's in student government or National Honor Society or sports. But especially on Sundays when I would go to church, I would do everything I possibly can to volunteer in other parts of the ministries, is so that I didn't have to go home. And that's where I found belonging. It's like, after school, I didn't want to go back home. And so I would sign up for student government to volunteer to put on like any sort of events we were doing. For me, it was an outlet so that I didn't have to go home to where I knew I didn't feel safe, I didn't feel loved, and it was the only outlet I found where I felt like I actually belonged and like I was loved. Because in those moments, in those places, whether it's with my classmates in student government or it was at church, there was someone that was there to love me that I wasn't getting at home. And so I found that as like an outlet, and it eventually became just like my place in my home.
Okay, so 14, you beat cancer. You beat cancer now with a metal rod in your leg, and the doctors tell you that at some point, probably this rod is not going to last for a lifetime. So at some point, you're probably going to lose your leg. In the meantime, you resume life and get through high school, and then go to college, and you were acquainted with ATO before. Obviously, you became an ATO, but Tell that story in terms of how you and ATO connected.
It was summer of 2011. It was my last. I went to so when I was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, my freshman year of high school was 2008, and each summer I had the opportunity to go to a summer camp that's dedicated to kids who either have or had cancer. And that 1 week a year was like, in my opinion, the best week of my life, because when I went back to school, I was, oh, that's just the kid with cancer. But when I was at camp, I was a dude that wanted to go rock climbing or go mountain biking and just like feel so free. But my last year as a camper was the summer of 2011, right before my senior year, and I'm assigned to a new camp counselor, and his name was Sean O'Neill. And Sean was a freshman at the University of New Mexico at the time, and Sean had every intention to go out of state for college. But his senior year of high school, his dad passed away. And it was probably one of the most defining times of his life. And when he went to college, he was just, Sean always shares the story with me, is that he felt lost. And he was trying to figure out his purpose and what he was going through. His freshman year, he signed up for a class called So You Want to Be a Doctor. And it's a freshman intro course for freshmen that want to go into medicine. And the doctor that teaches the class was my pediatric oncologist that saved my life. And at the end of the semester, he recruits Sean to become a camp counselor. And he was assigned to me. And lo and behold, I learned about Sean's story. Sean's dad, who passed away, was an ATO at the University of New Mexico. And Sean was a part of the founding class of the reestablishment of ATO at UNM. And Sean was probably the first time I had a really positive male figure in my life. And when I went to my whole summer leading up to my senior year, Sean mentored me. He's the one that taught me how to drive. He's the one that helped me apply for college. And when I was getting ready to go at UNM, he asked me, he's like, would you be open or interested in joining what we're building here at UNM? And that was ATO because of Sean.
What are the chances of all those things happening? I mean, that's remarkable. Do you still keep in contact with Sean? What's the last conversation you had with Sean?
Last conversation was Sean giving me crap that I'm going skiing this weekend because he's now a dad. And so Sean's now the family who I call my family is Sean and his mom and his sister, because, freshman year, the holidays came around and I didn't have anywhere to go. And Sean was like, hey, you should join us for Thanksgiving. And what happened is Thanksgiving then became Christmas. Christmas became Easter, and we naturally just became a part of each other's lives. And so Sean's family is my family, is who I celebrate my holidays with. They're there during the best moments of my life and have been there during the hardest times of my life since college.
So Sean invited you to join ATO after you met some of the guys who I think came to see you in the hospital. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they were just doing normal social service things, right, at the hospital, and that was another happenstance as it relates to you meeting some of the other guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think about my junior and senior year when I was finishing up chemo, there was members of ATO that were the founding father class that were just volunteering at the Children's Hospital, and it was my first exposure to one, college students, and two, fraternity guys, because obviously was never exposed to it until the last part of my high school. And for me, that was a really cool moment because I had the opportunity to see the positive of what fraternity men are and can be. And I ultimately joined fraternity because I think deep down I just wanted belonging. I just wanted family, and that is something that I found is the perfect combination of family and an opportunity to be a part of an organization that was trying to do good while in college.
Yeah, and so talk a little bit about how ATO impacted you. Obviously, you found some brothers, you had connection, a community, and but as we've already heard, you're atypical. So now you're an atypical college student who has already gone through a lot of things and made the choice to find a purpose and continue to move forward. So how did ATO impact you, and how do you think you impacted the guys in ATO as an undergraduate?
Yeah. It taught me a lot about like building genuine relationships with people that are different than you. I think that was like the coolest thing early on in college is this opportunity to really get to know these men that come from all walks of life. But what was interesting about a fraternity is that there's a common bond that you're committed to looking out for each other. You're committed to supporting one another. But also, I think early on when the chapter was established, it was we're here to use this chapter for something bigger than us, while also like enjoying the aspects of college and like those best friends and those memories. But there was truly like a deeper purpose behind why we commit to one another, and why we commit to this organization. But I think early on in fraternity, like it's interesting. I think if you'd ask Kyle in college, um, what he learned to now is vastly different. I think I learned how to lead a group of people that are vastly different from me. I learned how to create a shared goal and a shared vision. I learned how to fail more than anything. Learn how to like take, setbacks, whether it was events that did not go well, or not getting selected for a leadership position, or not being able to influence an idea in the organization, that ultimately taught me these like critical skills that for me I apply in every aspect of my everyday life. But I hope, the last part of the question you asked is what I hope, the guys I surrounded by learned. I hope they take back. It's that no matter what you go through in life, you can use it for good. You have a deliberate choice that you get to make on using the things that you're going through in life for something bigger than you.
You had a lot of accolades coming out of college, a lot of success, and started a number of things that some of which are continuing to this day. So left a legacy. How did you balance all of the success and all of the good things you were hearing about how you're doing with the pain that you were experiencing and experienced throughout your life?
I think there's three things here. When one is it was my way to take my life back. When I went to college, um, I moved out of my grandparents' house and I started over, like a complete reset. Because most of the people that I went to college with, I didn't know. I didn't necessarily knew a lot of people from, not a lot of people from my high school went to the University of New Mexico. And so I got a complete restart. And so that was an opportunity for me to ultimately like, take my life back. And I think there's a part of me that I was trying to prove something. When I'll be honest, like that is, I felt like it was my way to say, I'm not this broken kid. I'm not this cancer kid. I'm not this like there was a part of me that felt like I had to prove something. And I think the more I did, the more it was a way to show the world like I am worthy, I am enough. And I think ultimately the things I did were for good, but I think there was a deep down, it was that I was trying to show little Kyle that he made it. And that's hard. And it's been this like interesting journey with, now like this new chapter in my life. I don't have to prove anything, because I think it's been this relationship with that we are all already worthy. But I think there's a part of it that I felt like I had to prove something to myself. And I think second was there was this like survivor's guilt of like surviving and making it. And my 9 friends I went through treatment with didn't make it. And so there was a part of me that felt like I have to use this life for good in their honor, because they're not here. They didn't get to go to college. They don't get to pursue their dreams. But if I can at least use my life in honor and for good, I can somewhat try to continue their legacy. And I think the third is I learned a lot of lessons. I made a lot of mistakes that I now use to guide me, as like a professional, as a friend, as a brother, as a future partner that I now take deep to the heart.
Great. And so you graduated and decided to come to work for ATO and
Yeah.
expansion, opened up or started. Did you keep track how many next colonies that you started when you were on expansion, when you were
It
on an
was
expansion team?
I think it was 6.
6, yes, right, yeah. So just and no surprise, very effective recruiter. and then went off to pursue your life's journey. And then, what, a year and a half ago now, Kyle, you were the rod broke again. Take us through sort
Yeah.
of from going to being two-legged with a metal rod to the decision to go ahead with the amputation.
Yeah. So, so it was fall of 2020. It was in the midst of the pandemic, and as most people in the pandemic, we were spending a lot of time outside. And I've always had a deep passion for cycling, hence the bikes behind me. But I've always had a love for cycling because it was the one physical activity I could do with the metal rods that I had inside my leg. And I was spending some time in northern New Mexico. I was downhill mountain biking in Angel Fire, New Mexico, and I came off of a pretty high jump. And when I landed, my back tire slipped out. And when the tire slipped out, I flew into a tree, and my body hit exactly where the metal was implanted in my leg, and my femur and my tibia and the metal separated. And I remember laying there on the mountain, and I can see my leg in a ball, and I can see the metal separated from my bone. And when this may be, crazy to say, but I was laying there, and I knew the day that I dreaded has arrived. But I had this overwhelming, calming sensation that freedom was about to start. Because for 12 years, I lived with a lot of chronic pain. There was a lot of chronic pain and deep insecurities and fears and doubts that I didn't share. I had this mask up of positive Kyle because I didn't want to show that I was weak, but ultimately there was this artificial piece of metal inside me that I never chose. And there was a part of me it was like an anchor to my past life. And when I was laying there, I knew that the one thing fake about me was going to be cut out. My friend actually, he's recording me talking to the bike patrol, and I'm calm. And I'm walking him through the steps of what's going to happen next. And, the bike, you can see the face of the bike patroller that is just what the hell are you saying? You're saying you have these rods in your leg, you're going to have an amputation. I just said, sir, just trust me. We just have to get airlifted to the University of New Mexico hospital. And at this time, when it's the height of the pandemic, and so there's no rooms available in the hospital, and there's no guests allowed. And I land at the University of New Mexico hospital, and I sat in an urgent care hallway for 2 days until I had my surgery. And after those 2 days, the surgeon came in on October 20th, Dr. Chafee, and I looked him in the eyes and I said, I'm ready. And I would be wheeled down the hallway to the OR, and a couple hours later, I would wake up to find my left leg now gone.
Did you react the way you thought you were going to react at that point?
It literally felt like there was a weight that was gone. Like that symbolism of weight has been lifted, but I felt physically lighter and emotionally lighter because I'm no longer going to be held back by my pain. Moving forward, make a choice of how I want to live my life now. And the number one goal was let's just focus on what's right in front of me. And the first thing is just take the first step out of bed that afternoon. Just one step. And that's been this beautiful symbolism of this past 3 years, is taking things one step at a time. But in those one steps, being a really driven person, that one step turned to walking down the hallway with a crutcher. But I knew I had just to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it is.
Right. Other than feeling relief that this thing that you knew was going to happen has finally happened, so you didn't have to worry about it anymore, has your attitude changed pre amputation and your ability to recover, and now what you're doing now, has your attitude changed from the time that you were growing up and the decisions you made to be part of something bigger than yourself, to have purpose, versus what it is now, because you now don't have to make a terrible decision anymore. It's
Yeah.
done. Or are you pretty much same kind of focus in terms of pushing ahead, looking forward in a positive way?
I think I'm more honest and I'm more vulnerable. I think that is like what taught me. But after that accident, I think it just was like I can't hide the truth anymore. I have to be fully open about who I am, and I think it was I finally had this opportunity to heal my heart, but then also just to be extremely open about who I am and why I make the choices I do, because all throughout, those 12 years of living with the metal inside me, it was this toxic positivity. And to the point where I wasn't sharing all of my truth. I wasn't honoring the bad days and just being like, it's okay to not be okay, and to like struggle and like be open about it, because no one relates to the person on the mountaintop. No one relates to the person on the podium. No one relates to the person in the leadership position. They relate to that person's pain, though. They relate to the person that, like, because we're all going through shit in life. Like, there's not a single person that doesn't have their version of an artificial metal inside them. There's something about all of us that we feel like we're living with something that's fake, that's not truthful. And it's in those moments that we get to we can remove that out of our life, but we have to step into our truth and we have to honor that.
So now to bring life in this story current, you have very much become the athlete now. So tell us about what life looks like today, an athlete as well as being an advocate for a whole host of issues that you've done in the past, but have found some new ones as well.
Yeah. So right after the amputation, there's two big defining moments that happened. One, early on in my journey, I was thrown into a group text. My friend Arlene Armijo lives here in Albuquerque. She's been a long, dear friend of mine since I lived here, and she's owns a local track club. And Arlene, actually, a couple years before that, ran the Vancouver Marathon when she was a Lululemon ambassador with a gentleman named Dan Tunn. And Arlene got to learn about Dan's story while running the marathon, and Dan was a founder of a paratriathlon club based in Chicago. And she throws me in this group text saying, "Hey, Kyle, I need you to meet Dan. Dan supports athletes that live with a disability. I think this could be a really great outlet for you to get connected and be introduced to." And, Dan and I would text back and forth, but it wouldn't be for a couple of years that I would actually get to meet Dan. And that was because early on, I was pretty naive to the fact of how hard it was going to be to get access to proper prosthetics and care. In my mind, it was, okay, amputation happens. I'm going to get the best walking leg. I'm going to get a running blade. I'm going to get all of these things. And I was quickly faced with reality is that if you want those things, A, you have to fight for your walking leg, for the right proper prosthetic. And two, all of the prosthetics that you use for physical activity are not covered by insurance. And because insurance says physical activity is not medically necessary. So I'm thrown into this, like, first off, like, I have all of this positivity of like, okay, like life's going to be so much better as an amputee. But then I'm faced with the reality is that I'm going to literally have to fight my insurance companies to just get access to the basic necessity of a walking leg. Like, I received a denial letter that says the leg that you've requested exceeds your medical necessity and exceeds your everyday life purpose. And like, it essentially, what it says when it's like it exceeds your basic medical necessity. And it's like, you're telling me a proper prosthetic for me to go out through my everyday life exceeds my medical necessity.
Sounds a little oxymoronic for
Yeah.
an insurance company to say, we don't want you to be physical. so you can
Yeah.
get healthier.
And then you're thrown into the reality of, if you want to be physically active, like as an athlete, the only way for you to receive those devices are to either pay out of pocket or get out of state charity support.
So how'd you resolve this? Because clearly you have the equipment.
Yeah. And so, how that came about was, I had to, one, I had to self advocate. That was the biggest thing. It's like self advocate for what I need and fight for what I need. And eventually, overturned, the decision that the insurance companies made through working with my state. The Office of Superintendent of Insurance overturned the case because it was medically necessary. And, I learned that, you know, and ultimately this is where, the story kind of diverges, where this next chapter in my life, when it's, summer of last summer. Wow, it kind of feels like it's been so much longer than a year, but last summer I was invited to a triathlon camp, and I got to meet a really good friend of mine, Haley Dans. And Haley is also an above knee amputee. She survived the same bone cancer I did, and also is one of the only openly gay athletes. And early on in my journey, I would text Dan like so many questions about an amputee. I'm like asking him about prosthetics. I'm asking him about like certain workouts I can do. And there was a moment where he was like, Kyle, dude, I got two legs. As much as like I've been around amputees, I need you to meet someone. And he introduces me to Haley. And Haley is on the U.S. national team. She is a two-time silver medalist. And Haley and I get on a call, and it's like one of those other dividing moments where your stories are just so similar and your journeys are just aligned. And Haley was at a time in her life where she's wanting to mentor. She wants to support like the next generation in triathlon. And it was June. It was June of last summer, and she texts me. She's like, Kyle, there's a camp that we're hosting in a couple of weeks that I think you need to attend. And I know that you've been biking, you've been swimming. I know you haven't started running, but you should really come to this camp, because I think if you want to pursue this journey with triathlon, or if you want to pursue a journey with sports in as a disability, you need to go to a camp to not only be surrounded by other athletes, but so that you can also learn about the sport. And that same day, I texted my friend Arlene, who introduced me to Dan and eventually Haley, and her and her husband. I texted them saying, "Hey, will you go run one lap with me?" Because I'd had this running blade that was sitting in my closet that was donated to me by my prosthetist. It was just sitting in my closet because when I was so afraid to start running, because I was afraid that I would discover that I couldn't do it. So it just sat there. And so, I just said, I kind of try to just ignore it. It's like, I'll eventually do it. Like, I'll eventually start running, or I'll eventually pursue this dream, but it just sat in my closet. And I had a choice that day. She called me. I had a choice. I either learn how to start running, or I don't go to this camp and I don't pursue this dream. And I go, it's 95 degrees. It's a middle of the afternoon, hot in the summer. And I want to run one lap. And that one lap turned into a mile by the end of that session. And I remember just saying, I'm just going to go to this camp, and I just want to learn as much as I can, and I just want to finish the triathlon, and had no idea what finishing that triathlon would do next.
And so what's the trajectory from that? Because you have you've made news, you've got a lot of progress to report, right?
Yeah, so when I'm at that camp, I learned that, this race that is the last day of camp is a part of it's called the development series. So if you're a new and emerging para athlete, and you want to, pursue, kind of this roadmap of being a para athlete, is you go to local races, you go to development races that are nationwide. Those development races allow you to qualify for the national championships, and the national championships then opens up the opportunity to race within the continent, and then the continent, the world. And ultimately, your world ranking is what sets you up for pursuing the Paralympics, which is the highest level of sport for people living with a disability. And to be honest with you, Wynn, I just had the goal of finishing the race. That was like my number one thing, is just finish the race. And, by the end of, I wake up that morning and I had this feeling of like, what if I finish this race and just somehow, some way, I qualify for the national championships? And I knew it was a stretch because haven't done a triathlon fully. I've biked and I've swam, but I haven't ran a full length with the triathlon. And I finish up the bike and swim, and I'm on the run, and I have no clue what the time is. I'm just running, just like hard as I can. And I come around the turn, and I see the long final stretch towards the finish. And standing there is Dan Tunn, who I met early on, Haley Dans, who is the mentor of mine, and one of her teammates, Melissa Stockwell, who was the bronze medalist. And Dan screams, "You have less than 3 minutes." That's all I hear. He just screams that. And first off, I'm trying to connect the dots. I'm like, less than 3 minutes, like just run. And I cross the finish line with seconds to spare, and they all come running up to me and they say, "Kyle, you qualified for nationals at your very first triathlon." And that moment was just like this, like, holy crap. Like, I just did something I never thought I could do. Earlier this morning, I just said, finish the race, but my number one goal was just to finish it and to fall in love with the sport.
And how long was it before, like the day that you had the blade in the closet and were afraid to take it out because you didn't want to fail? How long between that day and the day that you qualified?
2 weeks.
Yeah, right. So then that's on brand for Kyle Stepp, I think.
And so when it's just been this, like, I went to nationals my first year, had another PR of a race, and that set me on the path to getting invited to training camps at the Paralympic and Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, which introduced me to not only the governing body, USA Triathlon. I eventually meet my coach, or who I selected as my coach, and this year started this path of seeing where the sport takes me. And, earlier this year, I would say the international debut was our continental championships in Florida. And that is, we're racing against all the top athletes in North America and South America. I ended up placing fourth in the race at that race. And that kind of trickled over this past year of having some phenomenal success. I won the national championships in the PTS2 men's class. To ultimately, in my final race of the year, I got third place at a World Cup in Long Beach, and I got fifth place at the World Cup in Alejandra, in Portugal. And so now this has set me on this kind of crazy path of pursuing elite sport in triathlon. But when I think the most important thing is sport has allowed me to use it for good too, and to use it for a platform of change. And that was probably the most defining moment was using sport this year to change the system for others.
So you're going to continue to pursue the Paralympics. You're certainly advocating for broader insurance coverages,
Yeah.
for amputees, so that they can get the proper what they need to be able to do what they want to do, and then also continuing to sit on boards and advocating for Children's Miracle Network, Back to the Cancer, working in hospitals, that kind of thing. What excites you these days, Kyle? All that,
Yeah.
right? You've got a lot on your plate right now. What excites you?
Is that we're creating systematic change for the disabled community. When, earlier this year, I had the opportunity to lead the efforts in New Mexico to make New Mexico the first state in the country to mandate health insurance providers to provide prosthetics and orthotics for physical activity for all ages. And what's been awesome is, after, the bill was passed in Maine for kids, we passed the law in New Mexico for all ages. It's also passed in Colorado, Arkansas, and Illinois. And over the next few years, we've launched I'm a part of an organization called So Everybody Can Move that was founded by a friend of mine, Nicole Verkeilen. And we are changing state by state laws to create access to physical activity through health insurance coverage. And so Our goal is to pass the law in 28 states by the LA 28 Paralympics. So it's this really cool parallel of, I'm pursuing the LA 28 Paralympics in triathlon, while also we're trying to create nationwide coverage for prosthetics and orthotics for physical activity so that every single person has the right to movement. So what excites me is being able to create system change while also pursuing this dream of I want to see what my mind and my body is capable of through the power of movement.
That's great, Kyle. And if people want to support you, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, would love just to connect with anyone via social media, at Kyle Stepp on Instagram, but also in the show notes we can tag my email, and would love just to stay connected and keep chatting.
Well, Kyle, thank you for taking time today. You definitely have an exceptional life, and I anticipate that it will continue to be exceptional as your young 29 years have already packed so much in. So looking forward to seeing what's ahead for Kyle Stepp. Kyle, thanks again for taking time. I'm sure that many of the folks listening have been inspired and encouraged by your incredible message.
Thanks, Wynn.